The cold, aloof goddess that men could only dream of actually came knocking at his door on the very first day of the apocalypse, acting all sweet and submissive. She claimed she would do anything just for a bowl of instant noodles. But just as Han Feng was celebrating his luck and getting ready to make a move, a spiked bat swung from behind the woman, instantly ending his life. This was the last live television broadcast of the apocalypse. The Earth had entered a new ice age, and global temperatures were plummeting. The government had not abandoned the people, urging everyone to unite and stay strong. But in the next second, a plane suddenly crashed into the frame, and the host and the TV signal cut out completely. Han Feng was currently curled up inside his cramped rental apartment. Suddenly, a long-lost knock echoed from the door. But at a time like this, whoever came knocking was rarely a good person. Grabbing his homemade spiked bat, Han Feng walked over to check. Peering through the peephole, he saw a shivering, freezing beauty. Han Feng gasped in surprise. "Huina, what are you doing here?" He quickly led her inside. Yet the moment she stepped through the door, she planted a passionate kiss right on his lips, instantly heating up the freezing room. Han Feng asked, confused, "Why are you being so forward all of a sudden?" Huina confessed, "I only realized 3 minutes ago that you are the only one truly worthy of my love." True love shows itself in times of trouble. Only those who truly love each other can give unconditionally. As she spoke, she grabbed his hand to place it over her heart. "To prove my sincerity, I will do whatever you want." Being a complete virgin, Han Feng blushed furiously in embarrassment. He tried his best to keep his composure and speak normally, but the woman suddenly asked him to close his eyes, promising a special surprise. While Han Feng closed his eyes in excitement, a dark figure quietly opened the apartment door, holding a spiked bat, and violently struck Han Feng to the ground. Lying in a pool of blood, Han Feng remained conscious enough to realize that these two had conspired to murder him, their eyes on his supplies from the very beginning. Soon as blood loss took its toll, his consciousness began to fade. The two cold-blooded killers actually started flirting right before his dying eyes. As his mind drifted, a warm light suddenly appeared. He thought it was the path to heaven, but his hand was tightly gripped by the glow. With a violent explosion, a crimson light enveloped his entire body. Han Feng bolted awake from the nightmare, only to find himself lying safely in his own bed. Bright sunlight streamed through the window, offering a warmth he hadn't felt in ages. Today was June 28th, and the apocalypse wouldn't start until July 15th. This meant Han Feng, who was supposed to be dead, had been reborn. After waking up, the crimson light remained wrapped around his hand. Aside from feeling slightly warm, it didn't cause him any discomfort. But when he sneezed, the red light suddenly turned green. Furthermore, the glow expanded, causing his whole body to shine. How did this work? Unlike the red light, this green light kept fluctuating in size. He suddenly felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. What on earth was this? Wait, could this be some kind of overpowered ability fit for a main character? But after messing around with it for a long time, Han Feng still couldn't make head or tail of it. A loud rumble from his stomach reminded him that it was time to eat. As a single bachelor, his fridge was completely empty. This was bad. If he didn't eat something soon, he was going to pass out. His eyes eventually landed on a jar of roasted soybeans. But this wouldn't fill him up, so he planned to head to the supermarket for a major haul later. The moment he popped a soybean into his mouth, a bizarre transformation occurred inside him. A soybean plant actually sprouted from his mouth, quickly growing lush leaves and deep roots. Was it because of the roasted soybean? Even more amazing, his fatigue vanished and the green light on his hand disappeared. In their place stood a cluster of actual, fresh soybeans. This ability was mind-blowing, and he knew he had to study it closely. Of course, the most pressing matter was to secure supplies before the end of the world. Walking through the crowded, warm streets, Han Feng wandered aimlessly, his mind occupied by his strange new power. Suddenly, a beautiful girl called out to him, offering a sweet smile. What a coincidence to run into you here. The person standing before him was none other than Li Huina, the very woman who had just murdered him in his previous life. This face belonged to the hypocritical, manipulative girl he had hopelessly fawned over for 3 whole years. But now, having been reborn, Han Feng was going to show her a cold shoulder. He rejected her advances and deliberately bought a heavily modified second-hand sports car, driving her absolutely crazy with curiosity. Han Feng had long seen through her dirty plot to use him as a scapegoat when the apocalypse hit. He intentionally acted as if he were still infatuated, playing hot and cold to trace her steps and destroy the doomsday scamming ring she worked for. Li Huina was the woman Han Feng had pretended to flatter for 3 years. Back then, he would jump through hoops for her, even though he knew he was just a convenient shield to be discarded when the time came. He never expected she would actually throw him to the wolves during the end times. Now was not the time to blow his cover. He needed to play along to locate the syndicate's headquarters first. Snapping out of his thoughts, Han Feng looked at Li Huina, who had been calling his name in a whiny voice, and slowly put on a slick smile. "Huina, you've gotten even prettier. I can't take my eyes off you." Huina had no idea of the calculations running through his head. She sweet-talked him and grabbed his arm, suggesting they go to a luxury mall together. But Han Feng simply replied, "Sorry, I'm busy," and turned on his heel. In the past, he was always at her beck and call. How had he suddenly changed so much? In truth, Han Feng knew all too well that every time Huina contacted him, it was only to use his wallet. Having a second lease on life, there was no way he would fall for it again. He immediately headed to the most remote wholesale warehouse for household goods in the city. When the glacial apocalypse struck in his previous life, normal supermarkets were looted clean within hours. Only this hidden warehouse had remained untouched. With only a few days left before the end, he had to quietly hoard items that would become absolute gold mines. Heavy-duty winter gear, military medical kits, breaching tools, and high-grade fuel. The more heavy-duty and secure the items, the better. The most pressing issue was his budget. He only had about 10,000 yuan left in savings, which wasn't even enough for basic goods, let alone high-end tactical gear. He needed to find another way. Just then, a text message from an old military buddy caught his eye. That was it. Han Feng slapped his forehead, cursing himself for forgetting this connection. There were plenty of high-quality goods available through military channels, and once the world ended, rules would mean nothing anyway. Li Huina stomped her high heels in frustration, kicking an empty soda can into the street. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. How dared this pushover disobey her? A poor guy who couldn't even afford a decent car actually thought he could walk away from her. Right then, the deafening roar of an engine drew her attention. A heavily modified supercar screeched to a halt right in front of her, its exhaust pipes spitting out cool smoke. The man behind the wheel was none other than Han Feng, who had just rejected her. Huina's eyes widened in utter disbelief. Han Feng said casually, "It's just a new toy I picked up. An uncle overseas sent me some money, so I bought this for fun. I was in a rush earlier to pick it up from the tuning shop." Li Huina stood frozen, unable to find her words, but she quickly switched to her manipulative act, grabbing his arm while whining and apologizing. She even managed to squeeze out a few crocodile tears, looking so pitiful she almost believed her own performance. Han Feng curled his lips into a smirk. "Silly girl, how could I ever stay mad at you? You will always be the most special one to me." With that, he playfully pinched her cheek. Huina pretended to blush and lowered her head, inviting Han Feng to a fancy Michelin-starred dinner that evening. But when she shyly looked up, Han Feng was already gone. What was up with this guy lately? He was playing hot and cold and she couldn't read him at all. In reality, Han Feng was busy moving supplies from the supercar's trunk into his hidden cellar. These were all high-value military supplies that would be extremely scarce in the apocalypse, but he played it off as a mystery to lure her in. He even made up a lie, claiming he was preparing a limited-edition luxury surprise for her. Huina smiled warmly, waving goodbye to him. Internally, she was already plotting how to bleed this newly rich sucker dry. She had no idea that Han Feng had already seen through all her tricks and was setting a trap of his own. These supplies were just the beginning. The real trap was yet to come. Han Feng looked forward to watching her scamming gang trap themselves once the apocalypse began, planning to wipe out every single one of their bases. He actually found himself anticipating the arrival of the end times. Starting on July 15th, when the apocalypse began, a bizarre blizzard would suddenly sweep the globe, dropping temperatures to -20 degrees Celsius. Within a month, the temperature would plunge to -70, locking the world in ice and snow and making it impossible to step outside. To survive the end times, Han Feng had to gather a carefully selected stock of heavy-duty supplies, keeping them sorted, sealed, and clearly labeled. Fearing that Li Huina's gang might catch on to his horde, he moved the most critical supplies in secret under the cover of midnight. Since the power grid would collapse completely, he acquired a solar generator along with plenty of backup storage batteries. The moment the apocalypse hit, the city's heating system would shut down, so he needed to turn his cellar into a temperature-controlled bunker, keeping a separate hidden compartment for high-value military gear. By the time all his preparations were complete, it was already the 14th, just one day before the apocalypse. Next, it was time to unlock the cryokinesis ability he had awakened upon his rebirth. Once the apocalypse hit, even high-maintenance women would sell their bodies just for basic supplies, but Han Feng could produce steaks out of thin air and make seeds sprout into massive trees with his hands. Because he had been betrayed and killed by a manipulative woman, he had awakened the life growth ability, allowing him to discard his old life and embark on a path of absolute dominance in the new world. Heavy winter coats, military medical kits, breaching tools, high-energy fuel. These supplies had to be as heavy-duty and secure as possible. But fate could be unpredictable. Just before the apocalypse arrived, Han Feng slipped and fell hard on his backside, ending up with a fractured foot. With no other choice, he had to ask Li Ji to drive him to the hospital. The temperature had dropped sharply over the past 2 days, and the constant snow made the roads extremely slippery. The emergency room was packed with injured people, turning the place into complete chaos. The exceptionally beautiful nurse on duty was Nurse Jin from the emergency department. She looked to be in her early 20s, but she was incredibly dedicated, rushing around to treat patients. Not only was she beautiful and capable, but she was also extremely kind to everyone. However, her main flaw was being too trusting. She knelt down to treat a patient's wound without paying attention to her surroundings. If anyone with bad intentions was nearby, she would be an easy target. Sure enough, an old man sitting next to Han Feng suddenly called Nurse Jin over for help. Han Feng had already found the man's behavior suspicious. The young nurse immediately went over to assist, but the old man pushed his luck. While she was distracted, he unlocked his phone and began secretly recording her. Sensing something was wrong, Nurse Jin tried to excuse herself to attend to other patients, but the old man refused to let go, grabbing her under the pretense of needing an examination, and even made inappropriate physical contact, leaving her uncomfortable and distressed. Just as the old man was about to go further, a crutch struck him with perfect accuracy. It was Han Feng, who had thrown his crutch right at him on purpose. Ignoring the pain, the old man shrieked, "Don't touch my phone." But it was too late. Han Feng had already snatched the device, securing the evidence. "You've got some nerve, old man. Secretly filming the nurse's legs. Get lost before I call the cops." The old man was furious, but he knew he wasn't getting his phone back. Despite claiming to have a severe back injury earlier, he dashed out of the clinic at lightning speed and vanished. While Nurse Jin stood there in confusion, Han Feng quickly explained that the man had been secretly recording her. Grateful for his rescue, Nurse Jin personally bandaged Han Feng's fractured foot. The soft, gentle touch of her hands made his heart skip a beat. Before he left, she carefully instructed him to return in a week to change the dressing. But in a week, the apocalypse would arrive, and they might never see each other again. The very next day, a massive blizzard and extreme cold swept across the globe. Although the self-proclaimed experts on TV assured everyone that the cold snap would be temporary, Han Feng, having lived through it once, knew better. Having stockpiled 10 years' worth of supplies, secured firearms through Li Ji, set up an independent heating system, and fully reinforced his apartment, he remained completely calm and prepared. Meanwhile, someone in the building's chat group actually claimed that the end of the world was coming. Han Feng was shocked. Aside from himself as a rebirth survivor, was there someone else who knew about the impending apocalypse? Just then, a mysterious neighbor in the building's chat group shattered his peace. Why had someone named the Outsider suddenly shown up to reveal the future? Trapped indoors by the deep snow, the building's chat group erupted into chaos. Several floor representatives loudly demanded answers from the property management. The management replied that the snow was simply too heavy and their staff was too limited to clear it. Furious, the residents began demanding a refund on their management fees. Han Feng knew in his heart that this snow was no ordinary weather event. It was a global catastrophe that would wipe out humanity. An owner named Jiang Xueyou stepped forward, urging everyone to head outside and clear the snow together while defending the management. He was immediately attacked by the floor representatives, who called him a lapdog for the property management. Jiang Xueyou replied that he was only stating the facts, pointing out that complaining wouldn't solve anything. Even if they cleared the complex, the main streets would remain blocked, so walking was their only option. He volunteered to lead the clearing effort. Listening to his articulate arguments, Han Feng recalled a few details about Jiang Xueyou. Before his rebirth, Jiang Xueyou had always been highly active in the group, constantly voicing his opinions. A short-tempered owner chimed in, "If you want to go out, go shovel snow. If not, shut up." At those words, the lively group fell silent. Soon, an owner with a profile picture of a cigarette offered to help, claiming he needs to discuss a project with his boss. Since everyone was running out of food, many residents quickly agreed to join the snow-clearing effort. The female owners also offered to support. The resident beauty and manipulative green tea, Li Huina, made a dramatic appearance in the chat. When Han Feng saw her message, he rolled eyes. Naturally, a few admirers immediately stopped her, saying, "With so many of us here, how could we let our sweet Huina do manual labor?" Taking the easy way out, Li Huina sent her followers to shovel snow while she stayed warm at home doing absolutely nothing. When it came to playing pretend, Li Huina was truly in a class of her own. His phone buzzed. It was Li Huina. The woman hadn't spoken to him for days, yet she had the audacity to message him, commanding him to buy groceries for her and attaching a provocative photo of her legs. Dressing like that when the world was freezing just to manipulate him was utterly shameless. But Han Feng couldn't care less, replying with a sarcastic text that made Li Huina throw her phone in frustration. During the early days of the apocalypse, the heating and internet were still functioning, and watching videos online was Han Feng's only source of entertainment. But by the second day, he was getting bored. His leg injury would normally take months to heal. Suddenly, he saw a shocking news report online. A man who had jumped from the 15th floor survived, and doctors discovered that his internal organs and bones were regenerating at a spectacular speed. It was a casual report, but it sparked an idea. Han Feng focused his green energy onto his injured ankle. The green light glowed briefly before fading, but nothing changed. It seemed he still needed to figure out how this power worked. Suddenly, a wave of exhaustion hit Han Feng, and he passed out. Entering a meditative state, he dreamed he was a wild man leading a flock of sheep, but a wild mountain goat suddenly leaped, throwing him far away. When Han Feng finally struggled back to his feet and tried to pet a female sheep, the animal suddenly shot out an 8-meter-long tongue, wrapping tightly around his leg and dragging him roughly to the ground. With a shout, Han Feng woke up in a cold sweat. The bizarre dream left him breathing heavily, but as he calmed down, he noticed his ankle was glowing with a soft green light, and his fractured foot had completely healed. Realizing that the green light could heal injuries while he slept, Han Feng decided to run an experiment. Shaking slightly, he grabbed a kitchen knife and sliced a small cut on his finger. In an instant, his entire hand was enveloped by the green glow. At the same time, the residents downstairs were working hard. Jiang Xueyou was smiling as he shoveled snow alongside everyone. Uncle Liu, who was nearly 80, was also actively helping. The twin brothers, Jin Taewen and Jin Taewu, were working nearby. Suddenly, someone slid and fell. The Jin brothers quickly rushed over to help her up. The girl was Nurse Jin, whom Han Feng had met at the hospital. Despite being a woman, she hadn't shied away from the hard work, coming out to do her part. The snow was falling heavier, and their efforts felt endless. Uncle Liu suddenly recalled a resident who had been moving tons of supplies into his apartment days ago. Jiang Xueyou suggested he was overthinking it, saying the neighbor was probably just renovating. But Uncle Liu disagreed. The resident had moved in large gas canisters and even installed a fireplace, which didn't look like a standard renovation. It looked like he was preparing for a long, harsh winter. By now, the residents had cleared the main road inside the complex, and driving out to buy groceries seemed possible. Suddenly, a neighbor overheard them talking about preparing for winter and ran over to pry. But with a loud thud, a massive snowball struck the back of his head. It was thrown by Liu Yan, who couldn't stand his laziness. But how could a grown man win an argument against a fierce woman, especially a beautiful one. Jiang Xueyou stepped in to stop the bickering, reminding everyone that they had important things to do. They all needed to stock up on groceries, or they wouldn't survive the winter. Uncle Liu pressed Jiang Xueyou about the person hoarding supplies, but Jiang claimed he didn't care. He believed the snowstorm would pass quickly, and things would return to normal. Besides, if the disaster did continue, having someone in the building with a large stockpile of food might actually be beneficial for the neighborhood. Realizing the logic, Uncle Liu let out a hearty laugh to mask his embarrassment. Soon, the wind blew harder, and everyone hurried out into the storm to buy supplies. Back in the apartment, Han Feng was drooling in his sleep when a loud banging rattled his door. Hearing that familiar booming voice, he knew it was Li Ji. When Han Feng opened the door, his jaw dropped. Li Ji had actually delivered the ultimate weapon, a semi-automatic sniper rifle. Li Ji had successfully retrieved the rifle from Brother Liu. Thanks to Han Feng's early warning, Li Ji had also stockpiled plenty of supplies for himself. However, Li Ji looked troubled. He explained that when he went to the major supermarket in the East District that morning, he discovered the entire place had been cleaned out overnight. Han Feng fell into deep thought. As expected, the event had occurred right on schedule. Clearing out an entire supermarket overnight was impossible for a regular person, unless someone possessed a pocket dimension ability like in the movies. The existence of a spatial ability user was highly unsettling. Han Feng had to master his own power as quickly as possible to defend against unknown threats. So far, he knew his ability could react with different ingredients to synthesize new items. However, the success rate was abysmally low, around 10% for plants and less than 1% for meat. After exhausting himself, he usually ended up with nothing but dirt, wasting precious resources. With some free time today, Han Feng was determined to figure out how to stabilize his ability. After thousands of failures, the first soybean finally synthesized successfully. Han Feng had finally grasped the trick. He realized that when releasing the green energy, the output level fluctuated. Each ingredient required a specific energy threshold. If the output strayed from that narrow range, the synthesis failed. This control scheme felt surprisingly familiar. It was just like those popular rhythm games from a decade ago. If the synthesis formula required a sequence of inputs within a split second, he had to hit every single one perfectly. All Han Feng had to do was nail the timing. Sure enough, this time he successfully produced a plump, fresh soybean. Next came the meat experiment. When meat synthesis failed, it turned into a disgusting black sludge. The basic principle was similar to the soybean. He had to discover the correct formula through trial and error. After countless attempts, Han Feng cleared his mind and sat in meditation. He realized that the red and green energies had to be combined perfectly while controlling the output in 8 different directions. Seizing the right moment, Han Feng successfully summoned a massive turkey. Hard work had finally paid off. With the formula for meat secured, Han Feng felt far more confident. By the 3rd day of the winter apocalypse, the entire country was buried under deep snow. Although official broadcasts claimed they were managing the disaster and securing supplies, the heavy snowfall had paralyzed transportation, power grids, and internet services nationwide. The building's chat group was in an uproar. The property office couldn't be reached, and residents were arguing constantly. Some, like Uncle Liu, questioned the situation, noting that if the government truly had things under control, rescue forces would have arrived by now. Instead of relief workers, heavily armed military vehicles were heading to the front lines. A massive conflict was brewing. In that case, Han Feng's sniper rifle would definitely come in handy soon. Among the residents, one person shared Han Feng's detached attitude, Li Ji. Having not seen him for a few weeks, Li Ji had visibly thinned from hunger. He suffered from frequent dizziness, a clear symptom of low blood sugar, surviving only on water for the past few days. Previously, he had soft-heartedly donated all his supplies to the committee to help his neighbors, leaving himself with nothing. Seeing this, Han Feng quietly made him an offer. If Li Ji kept an eye on the chat group and gathered intelligence on the building, Han Feng would give him 4 packs of instant noodles and 2 sausages. Li Ji knew Han Feng was just finding an excuse to help him. Moved to tears, he thanked him repeatedly, swearing he wouldn't nose into Han Feng's business and would deliver the info. Han Feng was pleased. Securing a reliable source of information with just a few noodles saved him from having to venture out himself. Suddenly, someone shrieked Han Feng's name. Before he could react, a stinging slap landed hard across his face. The culprit was Li Huina. Having never been slapped for no reason in his life, Han Feng was stunned. And the moment Li Huina opened her mouth, she dropped her classic manipulative line. "Han Feng, I am so disappointed in you." It turned out she was furious that Han Feng had ignored her plea for help and the photo of her legs, so she decided to make a scene in front of everyone. "You murdered me in my past life, and now you have the nerve to slap me. We'll settle both debts soon enough." As Li Huina kept whining, Han Feng took a deep breath and began his act. He claimed that the supplies he had prepared for her were stolen on the way, leaving him with only a tiny bit of food. Li Huina immediately pressed him about his remaining stock. Upon hearing that his food would only last him a few days, she was secretly thrilled. She even made the shameless suggestion, "You can just eat once every 2 days, so you can give me half your food." Pretending to be deeply touched, Han Feng agreed, setting a time for her to collect it from his place that night. Li Huina went away gloating, thinking her performance was flawless, completely unaware she was stepping right into his trap. Late that night, because the elevators had been out of service for a week, the high-maintenance Li Huina had to climb dozens of flights of stairs just for a meal. She would never have stepped out if it weren't for the food. When she finally reached Han Feng's floor, the emergency lights in the corridor suddenly went out, plunging the place into darkness. Before she could react, a heavy bag dropped from above, landing squarely on her head. A few seconds later, the lights flickered back on, and Han Feng rushed out, sweating profusely and apologizing, claiming he had accidentally dropped the bag while moving supplies. Li Huina was covered head to toe in white flour, looking absolutely ridiculous. In reality, this special treatment was custom designed for her by Han Feng. He then handed her a bag of what he called rations, which was actually just moldy, decaying garbage with bugs crawling inside. Han Feng claimed he had saved it by cutting back on his own meals, telling her she could take it or leave it. Fearing he would change his mind, Li Huina clutched it protectively, even scooping up the spilled flour from the dusty floor as if it were treasure. Watching his former goddess hold a bag of garbage like a prized possession, Han Feng sneered internally. That moldy trash would make her sick for days, and with no running water to wash, that flour would be stuck to her head indefinitely. After sending Li Huina away, Han Feng was about to close his door when he noticed something off in the shadows of the corridor. He dodged back and struck like lightning, pinning the hidden intruder to the ground. But when he saw the person he had subdued, he was taken aback. It was a cute, harmless-looking girl wearing black-rimmed glasses. Han Feng demanded to know what she was doing there, but the girl did nothing but pant heavily in terror, refusing to speak a word. Frustrated, Han Feng threatened to strip her clothes off, plunging them both into an awkward silence. In truth, Han Feng was still a clean-minded young man who couldn't bring himself to look at her like that. He sighed and let go, turning to close his door. To his surprise, the glasses girl reached out and grabbed the hem of his jacket, her large eyes staring intently at him. Her cold, focused gaze made him feel a bit uneasy. It seemed she wanted him to follow her. Suspicious but curious, Han Feng followed her to her apartment. The moment he stepped inside, he was stunned. The small room was packed to the brim with all kinds of survival supplies. Had this girl also known about the impending apocalypse beforehand? Unlike Han Feng's cheat of rebirth, the girl pushed up her glasses and calmly explained that she had predicted the arrival of the Ice Age through a complex mathematical model. It turned out that the outsider, the mysterious neighbor who had posted warnings in the chat and caught Han Feng's attention, was her. And the reason she targeted Han Feng was that she had hacked the building's security cameras, witnessing him stock up on supplies, and even catching the moment Li Ji delivered the sniper rifle. Han Feng felt cold sweat run down his back. As he stood there in shock, he turned around only to find that the girl had stripped down to a thin tank top right in front of him. The reason was simply that the room felt stuffy, and she was warm. It seemed she was indeed a typical, socially awkward science student, who had absolutely no concept of boundaries between men and women. After monitoring him for days, she had decided Han Feng was a reliable partner. She pulled him over to the sofa, rummaged through some clutter, and dragged out a brand new generator. It turned out her reason for bringing him over was simple. She had absolutely no idea how to install or start the complex machine. Amused and exasperated, Han Feng had to walk her through the steps of operating the generator, adjusting the gas-water heater, and even sorting her meat and vegetables. In the end, he had to demonstrate how to cook a meal. Soon, a table of hot food was ready. Han Feng complained under his breath that he felt like a full-time maid for this girl. But as he prepared to leave, he saw that the exhausted girl had already fallen asleep at the table. Sighing, Han Feng gently covered her with a blanket before heading back to his own place. The blizzard grew heavier, and the temperature continued to plummet. Over the next few days, this eccentric girl, who called herself the wielder of the Eye of the Wicked King, goodness knows what her parents were eating when they came up with such a Chunabiu name, came over daily with various gifts. She used every excuse to invite him to help with chores. Although her attempts at cooking resulted in disastrous, burnt dishes, her attitude remained enthusiastic. In the apocalypse, even burnt food was a luxury that countless people would fight to get. But while they enjoyed a rare moment of peace, the situation in the underground parking lot downstairs had spiraled completely out of control. Neighbors were already fighting violently over the dwindling emergency rations. Faced with the angry crowd, Jiang Xueyou realized the situation was about to turn. He grabbed a megaphone and shouted, attempting to shift the blame away from the committee to those selfish residents who were hoarding supplies. He twisted the narrative, claiming that merchants had raised the price of bread from a few yuan to over 100, forcing residents to pay exorbitant prices. Jiang Xueyou incited the crowd, saying they should unite and take back the supplies that belonged to them from the hoarders' homes. Already driven mad by hunger and cold, the owners were instantly rippled into a frenzy. They grabbed whatever makeshift weapons they could find, shouting and demanding to loot the hoarders. Seeing the danger, Li Ji quickly sent a warning message to Han Feng. Han Feng was woken by his phone vibrating, learning that the mob had started breaking locks and looting apartments door to door. Although he had weapons to defend himself, confronting hundreds of desperate people head-on would be suicide. Han Feng acted immediately, reinforcing his security door further. Suddenly, the entire complex fell into pitch darkness. The overtaxed power grid had finally collapsed in the blizzard. Han Feng knew that if the power cut out during such extreme cold, it would never be restored. He immediately started his backup generator. But once the mob outside realized the power grid was gone for good, the true nightmare would begin. Meanwhile, in another apartment in the complex, Li Huina was devouring a hot bowl of instant noodles. The man sitting opposite her was the speculator neighbor, who had hoarded goods at 50 times their price before the disaster. Once arrogant, he now only needed a cheap pack of noodles to make the goddess submissive to his every whim. Suddenly, loud footsteps and banging echoed from the front door. Before they could react, the security door was kicked open with a loud crash. Rushing inside were not regular residents looking for food, but a gang of killers wielding machetes. Outside, the blizzard raged, but Han Feng's apartment remained warm. Han Feng was currently messing with the security door, trying to set up a high-voltage electric defense system. But since he knew nothing about electrical wiring, testing it with a voltmeter resulted in a spark that almost blew up in his face. It was frustrating. He just wanted to wire a simple trap, but it was proving incredibly difficult. If only he could look up a tutorial online. Right then, a soft knock came from the door. Checking his monitors, Han Feng saw the glasses girl standing outside. He was about to open it, but the memory of being ambushed and killed when he opened the door in his previous life flashed in his mind. With mobs looting the building, he couldn't afford to be careless. He decided to talk to her through the door. Seeing that Han Feng wouldn't open the door, the girl looked disappointed, but she didn't leave. Instead, she hugged her knees and sat down against the door in the hallway, silently waiting. Just then, noisy shouts echoed down the hallway. It was the looters. Having been brainwashed by Jiang Xueyou, these armed residents were raiding apartments one by one. If they saw Han Feng's intact door, they would surely target it first. If they caught the glasses girl in the corridor, the consequences would be unthinkable. Fortunately, Han Feng acted fast, pulling the glasses girl inside just in the nick of time. Hearing no response inside, the thugs outside began violently bashing the door. But Han Feng's door was reinforced with a 5-centimeter steel plate, and the handles were made of alloy. After failing to make a dent, the The thugs gave up and moved on to other apartments. Embarrassingly, he held her a bit too tight and almost suffocated her. Still, she had survived. Once the thugs had gone, Han Feng went back to wiring his electric trap. The girl watched quietly, quickly understanding the mechanism. Relying on her physics background, she stepped in and made a few adjustments, easily sorting out the complicated wiring. Though she was quiet and awkward, her grasp of mechanics and electronics was genius. With her help, the electric trap functioned perfectly on the first try. Han Feng was amazed by her skills, though her constant talk about the eye of the wicked king still gave him a headache. With the job done, Han Feng was wondering how to kick her out. To his surprise, the glasses girl dumped all her luggage onto the sofa. She stripped off her jacket, walking around the living room in only her tank top, and matter-of-factly announced she would be staying here for a while. She even ordered Han Feng to make her dinner. Furious, Han Feng tried to kick her out, but during the struggle, he tripped over a wire on the floor and fell flat on his back. Yet landing heavily on the coffee table, Han Feng felt no pain. It turned out the table he had instinctively grabbed had softened like water, turning as soft as a mattress. At that moment, his hands were glowing with a mysterious purple light. Did this purple light have the power to soften objects? Han Feng tested it further and found that not only the wooden coffee table, but even his metal toolbox and heavy iron hammer became soft and pliable under the light. The glasses girl watched in sheer disbelief. Adjusting her glasses, the girl assumed that he was also an emissary chosen by the eye of the wicked king. Han Feng played along, claiming he was indeed a fellow chosen one with multiple superpowers. Surprisingly, this eccentric girl was incredibly easy to fool. Using this as her excuse, she marched straight into Han Feng's bedroom and fell asleep. Han Feng had no choice but to let her stay. After all, she did have some utility. Now, Han Feng wanted to understand the use of this purple light. With a thought, the two purple glows reappeared in his hands. He took a steel kitchen knife for an experiment. Under the purple light, the steel knife began to warp, its texture softening into something like jelly. Han Feng had a sudden inspiration. What if he combined this purple light with the green light he had awakened earlier? He channeled his red, green, and purple energies together into the softened knife. A miracle occurred. The blade, which had been as flimsy as paper, instantly stiffened. Not only was it fully restored, but its hardness was vastly increased, reflecting light like a mirror under the dim glow. It seemed that combining these energies could rewrite the molecular structure of materials, reinforcing them to diamond-like hardness. Under Jiang Xueyou's instigation, countless residents in the building transformed into looters, aggressively raiding their neighbors' apartments. Although they hit a wall with Han Feng, they successfully looted other floors. However, these looters had no intention of turning over the supplies to the committee. They wanted to keep everything for themselves. Suddenly, two thugs dividing their spoils in the corridor noticed the adjacent wall began to squirm eerily. In an instant, it warped into a terrifying, monstrous face, looking as if it were about to swallow them whole. Terrified out of their wits, the two scrambled and ran for their lives. This was Han Feng's doing. He had softened the wall and reshaped it. Controlling such a large area of concrete was exhausting, but the result was spectacular. He then rehardened the wall and struck it with a heavy sledgehammer. After a loud crash, the wall didn't even chip. Its hardness was truly staggering. The looters returned to report to Jiang Xueyou, claiming that many residents pretended to be starving, but actually had hidden stockpiles of food at home. Meanwhile, the normally mild-mannered Jin Taewon was violently beating a neighbor on the ground because the man had hidden 3 bags of food and only turned in 1. Seeing that Jin Taewon was about to beat the man to death, Jiang Xueyou stepped in to stop him. He put on a grand show of benevolence, stating that while rules had to be followed, he understood the man's difficulty in feeding a family of 5. He even publicly gave his own ration portion to the man. The beaten, bruised man was moved to tears, swearing absolute loyalty to Jiang Xueyou on the spot. The surrounding residents also looked at Jiang with admiration. Privately, the Jin brothers were confused, not understanding why Jiang hadn't punished the man instead of showing mercy. Jiang Xueyou sneered, explaining, "In times of chaos, you cannot punish everyone. To rule them, you must make them depend on the rules. By exchanging one ration to win over hearts, I not only build authority but also ensure he will willingly hand over the rest of his hidden food. This is the art of leadership." Watching from the sidelines, Uncle Liu sighed, realizing that Jiang Xueyou was extremely cunning, a true warlord of the apocalypse. Inside, Han Feng reinforced the entire apartment once more, raising its bunker-grade security to a whole new level. Suddenly, another knock sounded at the door. Peering through the peephole, Han Feng saw Li Huina. She was weeping hysterically, offering fake apologies and even uttering disgusting lines about letting him feel her sincerity. Had he not been murdered by her in his past life, he might have felt some pity, but the words she spoke today were identical to what she said on the day she brought men to murder him in his previous life. Han Feng knew very well that Li Huina was not alone. The lover who had bludgeoned him to death in his past life was surely hiding in the blind spot of the doorway. Han Feng initially wanted to pull out his rifle and shoot them, but to avoid alerting other mobs in the building, he decided to play it smart. He silently activated his ability, warping the concrete wall the lover was leaning against in the corridor, softening it completely. Outside the door, Li Huina kept crying and pleading, while the lover holding the spiked bat next to her was getting impatient. Just as the two were completely off guard, a fist enveloped in glowing energy suddenly punched through the softened concrete wall, striking the lover squarely in the face. The massive force knocked him down instantly, bleeding and twitching in agony. Right after, the closed security door swung open. Han Feng rushed out with a fire extinguisher, spraying dry ice directly at Li Huina's terrified face, freezing her and making her scream as she recoiled. Amidst the thick fog, Li Huina coughed uncontrollably. Seeing her lover convulsing on the floor, she was scared out of her wits, trembling and backing away. Wailing and weeping, she demanded to know how Han Feng could be so cruel. Han Feng sneered, "When you teamed up with your lover to take my life, did you think about showing mercy?" He stepped closer, his heavy aura forcing Li Huina to collapse onto the floor, pale and trembling. However, taking advantage of a split second when Han Feng was distracted, the woman suddenly scrambled to her feet and fled down the dark corridor. "Consider yourself lucky, you witch," Han Feng spat. But dealing with the large man on the floor was the priority. As Han Feng prepared to finish him, the once arrogant lover begged for mercy like a dog. But Han Feng had no intention of showing mercy. The pent-up rage of being betrayed and murdered in his past life was fully unleashed. He beat the man to a pulp, then grabbed a heavy object nearby and smashed it down. Once the man stopped breathing, Han Feng finally took a deep breath. After all, this was his first time taking a life across 2 lifetimes. The glasses girl had watched the entire bloody revenge from the sidelines, her expression completely calm and unbothered. Han Feng marveled at her courage, advising her to stay away. "This place is too dangerous. This guy's gang could return at any moment. Go back to your place." But the girl shook her head stubbornly, refusing to leave and insisting on sticking close to him. Han Feng was getting anxious. "If you stay, you could lose your life. This isn't a game." The girl launched into another Chunabiu speech, claiming the eye of the wicked king would protect them. Seeing Han Feng's growing anger, she hesitated before inviting him to come inside and take a look. Once Han Feng followed her inside, her next action left him dumbfounded. It turned out this eccentric girl possessed an incredibly rare superpower: pocket dimension storage. Taking a deep breath, she actually opened a slowly spinning black hole in her chest, sucking in everything she laid eyes on. However, her control was still clumsy. Because the space inside was vast and pitch black, she struggled to retrieve items precisely. Watching her right hand search inside the black hole, Han Feng gathered his courage and stuck his head into the vortex to help her find things. The scene inside the pocket dimension was breathtaking. Countless store shelves and merchandise floated quietly in the empty, dark void. Han Feng instantly realized that the mysterious figure who had cleaned out the entire East District supermarket overnight was the girl before him. But in the next second, he felt his lungs seize up, and his eyes felt like they were about to pop out of his skull. He struggled frantically, finally pulling his head back and collapsing onto the floor, gasping for air. The pocket dimension was a vacuum with no oxygen. He had almost suffocated to death inside. Meanwhile, the underground parking lot was in an uproar as residents queued to receive the last of the emergency rations. To get extra food, Li Huina sneakily pretended to be Ms. Liu from room 601 to claim double rations, which sparked outrage among the neighbors. In her mind, she kept thinking of the warm room and glowing lights in Han Feng's apartment, swearing to uncover his secrets. Just as she claimed the food and tried to slip away, she was recognized by Zhang Qiang, a neighbor who had lusted after her beauty before the disaster. Using her double ration fraud as blackmail, Zhang Qiang made crude suggestions, trying to force her to spend the night at his place. Li Huina yelled at him to get lost, but Zhang Qiang aggressively shoved her to the ground to assault her. In the nick of time, a fair hand reached out, pressing lightly on Zhang Qiang's shoulder, and a terrifying, brute strength sent the grown man flying over 10 meters away. The rescuer was Nurse Jin, who possessed superhuman strength. Jiang Xueyou stepped forward to check on Li Huina, who showed no gratitude and only wanted to escape. However, recovering from the blow, Zhang Qiang flew into a rage, pouncing on Jiang Xueyou and pinning her to the ground, beating her. Right then, a large hand clamped onto Zhang Qiang's arm like a steel vice, lifting him by the collar and slamming him to the ground. The savior was Li Ji, who despised men who beat women. Jiang Xueyou arrived with his men after hearing the news, and Zhang Qiang quickly made false accusations, exposing Li Huina's double ration scheme. Li Ji was about to speak up, but Jiang Xueyou beat him to it, grabbing Zhang Qiang's collar and roaring, "The committee's goal is to ensure everyone eats. Start trouble again, and I'll kick you out immediately." Jiang Xueyou then invited Li Ji and Jiang Xueyou to join the committee. Straightforward as ever, Li Ji rejected the invitation on the spot. Jiang Xueyou also politely declined, stating she was happy to help treat patients but didn't want to join the committee. Seeing an opportunity for protection, Li Huina actively clung to Jiang Xueyou, showering him with compliments. But Jiang Xueyou pushed her away coldly. In his eyes, Li Ji could fight and Nurse Jin could heal, whereas a vain woman like Li Huina had absolutely no value. Panicking, she whispered through gritted teeth to save herself, "I have a secret. I can help you find a massive hoard of premium supplies." Upon hearing Li Huina's intelligence, Jiang Xueyou immediately dispatched a group of men, led by a minor henchman, to quietly approach the 18th floor. Although they had been scared off last time by the wall that moved and formed a face, and the henchmen were terrified, the leader scoffed at their fear, urging them to make their move quickly. However, their movements and conversation were already captured by the pinhole cameras and drone positioned on the 18th floor. Spotting the intruders on the monitors, the glasses girl immediately warned Han Feng, and the two activated their defensive traps. Just as the henchman and his men turned the corner, a row of bright lights lit up above them, and several remote-controlled toy cars rolled toward them. Before the thugs could react, the crude explosives and bags of lime powder on the cars detonated. Billowing smoke and stinging lime powder flooded the corridor, blinding the men instantly. Next, a drone carrying a miniature bomb flew in, causing the blinded thugs to flee in panic. Cornered, the leader swung his crowbar, striking the drone and damaging one of its rotors, causing it to fly out of control. Although the glasses girl tried her best to steer it, the damaged drone crashed through the window, detonating in midair like a burst of fireworks. Although the drone was destroyed, the glasses girl spotted a stiffening figure lying in the snow at the edge of a backup camera's feed. Zooming in, Han Feng was shocked to see that it was Li Ji. It appeared that after refusing to join the committee, Li Ji had been beaten by Jiang's gang and left in the snow to freeze. The outside temperature had dropped to a freezing -48 degrees, and Li Ji was on the verge of death from hypothermia. Remembering that Li Ji had helped him secure weapons before the disaster and had always looked out for him, Han Feng decided to go out and rescue him. Before leaving, he warned the glasses girl to lock the door and not open it for anyone. The girl reached into her pocket dimension and handed him a walkie-talkie to keep in touch. Arming himself with a pistol and putting on his winter gear, Han Feng took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and stepped into the pitch-black, storm-swept corridor. Using this combination of carrots and sticks, Jiang Xueyou not only won the gratitude of his defeated henchmen, but also secured their loyalty. Seeing this, Li Huina tried to use the information about the massive stash on the 18th floor to officially join the committee. Although Jiang Xueyou couldn't verify the claim, Uncle Liu had previously witnessed someone moving massive quantities of supplies. He decided to gather his forces and personally lead them to the 18th floor to investigate. Li Huina followed along shamelessly, as Jiang Xueyou had made it clear that no matter how pretty she was or how sweet she talked, She would not be kept if she didn't prove her combat value to the survival team. Soon, the core members of the committee reached the 18th floor. There they found Li Ji collapsed in the snow, barely breathing. Jiang's men forced boiling water down his throat, causing him to shriek awake from the heat. But when he realized his saviors were Jiang Xueyou and his gang, Li Ji spat and cursed them. The Jin brothers flew into a rage, calling him ungrateful, but Li Ji sneered. If anyone should be thanked, it's the neighbors whose food you stole. Showing off with stolen good, you shameless thieves. Jin Taewon was about to strike, but Jiang Xueyou stopped him with a smile. Maintaining his benevolent facade, Jiang tried to coax Li Ji into joining the committee, but Li Ji had long seen through his hypocrisy, refusing without hesitation. Under your management, the elderly only get one meal every 3 days while you feast in the background. Even if I die, I will never team up with bandits like you. Watching from his screens, Han Feng was surprised. It turned out Jiang Xueyou only sheltered the weak to use them as moral leverage and attract young fighters. This committee would collapse from within sooner or later. Seeing Li Ji refuse, the Jin brothers lost patience and surrounded him, preparing to kill him. Seeing Li Ji's life in danger, Han Feng knew he couldn't stand by. Although the enemies were numerous, Li Ji had helped him and he had to save him. Acting quickly, Han Feng chambered around and pushed his door open, rushing out. Just as the Jin brothers were about to strike, a deafening gunshot shattered the corridor's silence. The bullet whizzed right past Jin Taewon, scaring him so badly he collapsed onto the ground, nearly losing his life. The sudden gunshot froze everyone in place. No one dared to move. Holding his gun with both hands, Han Feng barked coldly, "Don't move." Pointing the gun at them, he quickly stepped forward, pulling the frozen Li Ji behind him for protection. Even the cunning Jiang Xueyou could only raise his hands under the black muzzle. Li Huina was dumbfounded, unable to comprehend how this former pushover now held a gun. Holding them at gunpoint, Han Feng ordered them to drop their weapons and squat on the floor. Under the threat of the firearm, the committee members could only watch helplessly as Han Feng escorted Li Ji back inside the safety of his apartment. The gunshot's deterrent was massive. Even 10 minutes later, the crowd in the corridor dared not make a move. With a dark expression, Jiang Xueyou demanded to know who this was. Li Huina quickly informed him that it was Han Feng, and that he had a massive hoard of supplies. Jin Taewon cursed Li Huina for hiding the crucial fact that Han Feng had a gun, but Jiang Xueyou stopped him. He didn't rush to punish Li Huina, instead using the opportunity to brainwash the crowd, shifting the blame of hoarding and causing neighbors to starve onto Han Feng to incite their hatred. However, Jiang had also gauged Han Feng's bottom line. If Han Feng truly dared to kill, he would have shot someone just now. As long as the kid hesitated, they would eventually find an opportunity to breach the door. Jiang ordered everyone to retreat for now to prepare. Returning to the warm apartment, the blast of heat made the frozen Li Ji gasp in amazement. Han Feng quickly shut the security door. The place had a cozy fireplace, a diesel generator, and a mountain of supplies that could last over a decade. The glasses girl poked her head out, reminding Han Feng not to forget the drone hanging outside the window. Hearing that they even had a high-tech drone, Li Ji's jaw dropped again. Under Han Feng's warm hospitality, Li Ji finally devoured a hot meal. Wiping his mouth, Li Ji expressed his sincere gratitude. At the same time, he revealed the current power dynamics in the complex. Under the banner of collectivism, Jiang Xueyou had been raiding apartments, and anyone who refused was brutally dealt with by Jin Taewon in secret. The Jin brothers had now become Jiang Xueyou's right-hand men and enforcers. But Jiang Xueyou's tyranny had eventually hit a wall. He had provoked Li Zhenghao, the city's heavyweight boxing champion who lived in the complex. The committee's raiding team was beaten to a pulp by Li Zhenghao. Instantly famous, Li Zhenghao quickly gathered a large group of followers. Among them were 2 powerful enforcers, Jiang Xueyou, a lightning-fast professional underground cage fighter, and Jin Zhangzai, a bull-like iron fan with superhuman strength. Together, the 3 of them formed a powerful new faction capable of rivaling Jiang Xueyou. Faced with the rise of Li Zhenghao's faction and a severe food crisis, Jiang Xueyou decided to take a gamble to divert internal conflict and seize supplies. He personally led dozens of thugs to Han Feng's door, guided by the traitorous Li Huina. Just as Han Feng was about to throw the switch to electrify the iron door, The glasses girl stopped him, smelling a strong scent of sulfur. Before they could react, a deafening explosion went off, the shockwave knocking all three of them to the floor. The attackers had used demolition charges. Han Feng scrambled up and flipped the switch. Screams of agony echoed from outside as the bomber was instantly electrocuted and fell to the ground, twitching. Humiliated and enraged by the setback, Jiang Xueyou decided to target the adjacent concrete wall instead, doubling the explosives. With another ground-shaking blast, the entire building seemed to shudder. But after the dust settled, Han Feng's reinforced door stood completely unhurt. Frustrated, Jiang gritted his teeth and decided to use a triple charge for continuous blasts, determined to breach the doorway today. Under the continuous blasts, the concrete wall finally began to crack under the pressure. At this rate, the defense would eventually fail. Using furniture to block the doorway was no longer useful. They had to clear the space to repair it. The glasses girl volunteered immediately. Under Li Ji's dumbfounded gaze, she opened the pocket dimension on her chest, instantly swallowing all the heavy furniture blocking the door. Once the area was cleared, Han Feng pressed his glowing green and purple hands against the cracked wall. Under the combined effects of his abilities, the concrete softened and fused, fully restored and strengthened to a whole new level of hardness. But before they could sigh in relief, the glasses girl issued another alarm. Seeing that the walls were bomb-proof, Jiang's gang planned to go to the apartment below to blast through the floor. If they blasted the floor, repairing the walls would be pointless. Rather than waiting to be trapped, a ruthless look flashed in Han Feng's eyes. He decided to strike back. Gathering together, the three of them quickly formulated a shocking plan.